Hey, Peter, let's get started.
Yep, let's do that.
Hi. Hello, everybody. It's Peter and I welcome you to this demo of our Visual Studio Code extension. Since the first version of Karate was released approximately 6 years ago, we have crossed 400,000 monthly downloads and work with 400 plus companies, which include 42 of the Fortune 500 companies. We have shared our vision product roadmap with approximately 250 enterprise teams and taken their feedback over the last 12 to 14 months. One key request was to make the scaled adoption of Karate frictionless and having the option to convert or reuse existing test scripts. We focused on the first one. We have made onboarding of Karate frictionless with the release of our official plugins for IntelliJ, which we released in June of this year, and the Visual Studio Code extension, which we released on September of this year. But we knew our work was not done because we still had to address the second part of their feedback, which is having the option to convert or reuse existing test scripts. On our first anniversary since we incorporated Karate Labs, which is the 1st of December, we released a major update to the Visual Studio Code extension with pro features such as debugger, code folding, JSON refactoring, importing from Postman, OpenAPI, Swagger, curl, and HAR files. It gives us pleasure to be able to host a demo to walk through some of these features. This video will be made available on our YouTube channel. And for any clarifications, questions, you know the channels to reach us on. So Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Kapil. Welcome everyone to this session. It's completely going to be about Visual Studio Code and the Karate extension for Visual Studio Code. Shouldn't take more than 20 minutes. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A, and those of you who are actually attending live, this is a good chance to just ask away any doubts that you have regarding the extension or even beyond that if time permits. So where do we start? I'll first take you all to the home page of the Visual Studio Code extension for Karate. And let me start sharing. This is it, the marketplace entry for the Karate extension. Actually, it's doing really well ever since we announced its release and the update that we're going to go deep into. The number of installs has really been ticking up. So that's making Kapil and myself really happy to see that. As a reminder, in fact, one of the intents or one of the things we really wanted to achieve with the way that this extension is constructed is that anyone should be able to be up and running with writing their first Karate test within like 1 or 2 minutes. And we actually achieved that. As you can see, the Karate extension for Visual Studio Code is ready to run. It actually embeds all the runtime environment that it needs to execute tests and do all the things that you expect from Karate, which is seeing HTML reports and so on. And I will give you a demo of some of these key features today in this session. Let's take a look at the core features. In case you didn't know, Karate is actually this full stack framework that does API testing, API mocking, which I will demo actually today. API performance testing, which is not something we'll talk about today, but if you have questions about that, do ask or go through the documentation. And of course, UI automation is one of the very, very interesting things that Karate does. So you can actually write hybrid tests. You can actually have API calls and UI calls in the same test. Today, actually, I'm going to show you a demo of debugging a UI test. So that's like pushing the boundaries of what test automation frameworks typically are expected to do. That's one of my favorite demos coming up in about a couple of minutes, so stay tuned for that. Syntax coloring, the outline view, JavaScript highlighting. Those of you who might be long-term users of Karate know that Karate actually uses JavaScript in a very interesting and effective way. Karate bundles a JavaScript engine. So it's important that JavaScript support is part of the developer experience, and that's what we have achieved. I'll show you how to run tests using the code lens. That's one of the brilliant innovations in Visual Studio Code, where it's just one click. completely integrated. You don't need to leave your workspace and so on. And there's a lot more coming. And in case you all have suggestions as to what you would like to see in future editions of the Visual Studio Code extension, do reach out. You know where to find us. We are always open to listen to feedback and suggestions for improvements and so on. I will show you the color log outputs. One of my favorite things about the extension. Once you get used to seeing the color, and especially Visual Studio Code is great at dark mode, which a lot of developers like nowadays. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. One click to open the HTML report. That's pretty cool. One of the things you do very often when working with Karate is, looking at reports, of course. So that's made a lot more convenient. And speaking of GitHub Codespaces, this is one of the very, very key things that we made sure worked in the plugin from day one. And in fact, let me just take a small detour, show you what Visual Studio Codespaces looks like. And the key thing here, what you're seeing on that I'm sharing, right? What you see on my screen, it's actually just Chrome. It's yet another browser tab. What this means for you and your teams is you don't need to set up anything locally. You can even use like an iPad or a Chromebook. And as long as you can access a browser, you have a browser, you have Chrome, just take a URL, and that's the only onboarding you need for your team. And I'm actually going to run a test here. You'll see an example of the color log output. There it is. This is a test actually running somewhere in the cloud, but it looks as if I'm working locally. The exact same ID experience that you expect from Visual Studio Code, with files being detected as Karate files and so on. You're also seeing the syntax coloring and to repeat the log output. So that's all about Codespaces. I will now focus most of my demo on actual Visual Studio Code running locally. And I've, to make it easier for you to see, I've just bumped up the font size. And now I will proceed to actually go through all the features in the plugin. I think the outline view and is pretty straightforward. If you have a file with multiple scenarios like this one here, you will see the scenarios in the outline view. And of course, if you have proper names for your scenarios, you would actually see it turn up on the left panel. So it's kind of a table stakes thing for extensions. And we certainly have that. In terms of the one-click report, this is a test that I just ran. And as a reminder, one of the key things about Karate is that the HTTP traffic appears in line in the HTML report. So that's super convenient, especially if you have a failure, you know exactly what went wrong, what were the steps leading up to the failure, and so on. Okay, so some of the key features, and we're going to deep dive into the key pro features of the Karate Visual Studio Code extension, right? Most of the things that you normally need to do for day-to-day tests are in the freemium option. You can just start using them and all that. But I really want to deep dive into some of the features that actually extend and enhance, up-level the developer experience, which are important to some teams. OpenAPI and Postman Import is something I will talk about in a moment. But let's look at debug. And just in case you're wondering, okay, if you've already installed the plugin and you are thinking about how do you actually get some of these extended features, signing into Visual Studio Code is pretty straightforward. I won't do a demo right now, but there's plenty of instructions, including a video of how to do it in the documentation for the plugin. And as a hint, anytime you're in Visual Studio Code, the bottom left has an accounts panel. It shows that I've actually logged into Karate. It's like a half-a-minute process to log in. Once you're logged in, you're not asked again for a login for a period of time. So, it just keeps you focused on your work in your environment. So remember that, yeah, there is a way to actually upgrade Karate. And once you upgrade, you actually see on the left, if you see what I'm hovering over on the left, there's actually a Karate activity bar icon that that appears when you are signed in, and you see the debug menu here. See on the top where I'm hovering my mouse. So I'm going to now do a demonstration of debugging a UI automation test. And what I'm looking at is actually a Karate browser test. So this, if I, kind of give you a play-by-play account of what's going to happen, we're going to first try to log into GitHub with a fake username that doesn't exist. We actually would validate. And, I'm one to always say that when you're doing testing, assertions is the most important thing you should be doing. Here, what I've highlighted is an assertion for the error message that appears on the screen. The test then takes a different turn. We go to google.com, we type Karate DSL in the search bar and click the I'm feeling lucky button and validate if we have landed on Karate Labs, Karate, the URL. If I just run this test, I'm going to be hands-free. It's going to bring up Chrome, do all the things that I just talked about. Pretty fast, pretty effective. And you certainly see a good report, including a screenshot. So Karate's UI automation features are pretty comprehensive. In case you haven't tried them out yet, I really advise you to do that. And a reminder that in the latest version, Karate 1.3.0, we actually have incorporated visual testing. So that might be of interest to those of you who have those needs. Things like, comparing PDFs or, screenshots of anything should be possible. And we're still, getting a lot of initial feedback, which is very promising. And lots of people excited about visual testing in Karate. Okay, so I just ran a UI automation test, but now I'm going to run the same test in debug mode. And when you debug something, you actually would set a breakpoint somewhere. So let me put a breakpoint here after we clicked submit when we try to log into GitHub. And here's the debug code lens right next to the run code lens in Visual Studio Code. And boom. In fact, you see how focus came back to Visual Studio Code, and the line is highlighted and we are in debug mode. This is great for test automation enthusiasts because you know what this means, right? This means you've actually stopped the flow of time in a sense, and it gets better in a moment. So hang on. But we have stopped the flow of time, frozen the browser in the middle of a test. And this is excellent because you can do all these nice things from a browser developer tools point of view. What I've done now clearly is I have opened the developer tools, and you can examine the HTML and the DOM to your heart's content, which is quite important. You know that if you're doing UI automation, this is something you would be doing a lot. Okay, so let's get into something even more interesting. If I switch to the debug console and pay attention to what I'm typing at the bottom left of the screen, if I say things like highlight, hash login field, see what happened on the right. You can actually interact, you can play with the DOM, and you can actually test the things that you want to add into your script. This is super useful. Let me give you another example. I can say highlight all. If you just add all, it tries to look for all elements instead of the first one that matched. And I'm going to do something interesting. I'm just going to ask, I'm just trying to see on this page, where are all the input fields of any kind? In other words, any HTML element that has the name or tag name input. So if I click enter now, you see what's happened, right? It's actually gone and found all the inputs. And you can see how with trial and error, you can actually experiment with all the very complex locators that you would need to encounter and deal with when you're doing really complex UI automation. So debug is essential. I consider this one of the most important tools in a developer's toolkit. And of course, if you are in the business of test automation, something you would strongly, which will certainly save you a lot of time. Now, I told you that we could, stop the flow of time, but what if you could actually reverse the flow of time? And that's what I'm going to do right now. The button you can see I've hovered over is called Step Back. And yes, you can actually step back during a live debug session. This is a big deal. May I remind you all that this is something you can't do in normal programming languages like Java, JavaScript, Python, Ruby, you name it. But yeah, Karate actually allows this. So that's a interesting bits of engineering that's actually gone behind the scenes. I'm going to replay the step. And now there's something even more interesting I'm going to do, which is I'm going to edit the test on the fly without restarting it. Let me change that XXX to YYYY. If I save the file, and if I hit this green button, which is to hot reload, guess what's going to happen if I now play forward the test? It's actually going to input Y. It's actually edited the test, applied that edit on the fly using a hot reload. And this is amazing, right? You can imagine how this is really going to save you time when you have this, troublesome test that keeps failing at the last part, and you don't want to go through that pain of logging in, getting authentication, all the other steps. You can just tweak your test until it works. This is literally like, changing the engine of a car while the car is still running, that kind of thing. So that's the debug support. Do check it out. Of course, even though I'm demoing this to you on a UI automation test, this is going to work exactly the same way for API tests. So if you have a lot of API tests that are really complex and you really want to do debug, you know what to do now. So that's about debug. Let's see what's next. Yeah, we covered debug. There's a video of what I just showed you on YouTube in case you just want to revise some of the concepts. It's a very quick video. Code folding is not is easy for me to demonstrate. Yeah, any scenario in Karate can be collapsed. This is kind of convenient, especially when you have lots of tests. The other thing that does collapse is any doc string section like this does collapse. So it's kind of when you're focusing on one part of a really large file, this can be super convenient, of course. JSON formatting is one of my favorite features. It is something I really wanted for myself, and some of the best innovations, obviously, when you make it for yourself in some ways. Let's see if I get a good example. JSON, yeah, this is great. So look at this. Karate has this very nice way of expressing JSON on multiple lines using the triple quote docstring system, famous in Python kinds of languages. When you are within a JSON section like this, see that bulb icon, which is kind of a refactoring menu in Visual Studio Code. If I click that, I get these very nice options. I can simplify JSON. I'm a big fan of simplified JSON where the keys are not having quotes. In fact, single quotes are sufficient. Really, to me, it reduces the amount of noise on the screen. I actually don't like strict JSON a lot in my test. I really like to keep this is much easier on the eyeballs, and it gets better if I want to make this a single line. Yeah, and it's come back to actually complex JSON. So let me simplify it again. I can simplify it. See how nice, you can see all the things. There's a lot more space to breathe in a sense. That's how I actually think about this. And yeah, if you want to go the other way, that's certainly possible. I can make this multi-line again, and we are back to where we started. Okay, so that is the JSON simplification and formatting, which, it's something I've wanted for years. It's finally there. I'm sure a lot of you power users of Karate will completely understand how, nicer this is going to make your experience with Karate. So, do look out for that. That's JSON formatting. Run mode. Now, if you go to the Karate activity bar and run mode, by default, we use the embedded environment that comes along with the plugin. And remember, this is what we expect a lot of teams to just use, because you don't need to worry about installing Java, for example, because Karate does use Java behind the scenes. But if you are a team that's actually using Maven, you can switch to Maven. And in that case, when you actually run a test, it will be using your Maven install and running the test. So you get the same experience. So this is super convenient. In fact, we don't want Maven users to lose out in a sense. And if you're using Gradle, it's a little bit of extra work. You can write a custom Gradle task, and then you'll be up and running with this plugin. So we've done our best to make this plugin work not only for people who just want to get started with Karate. That's the ideal state, ideal kind of user profile for this plugin in sense. But yeah, if you are using Java or Gradle, you can use this, overlay the Karate extension on top of your existing project, and just work like before. Run options is interesting, and let me show you what I mean. For example, before showing you the run options, let me show you that in pro mode, when you have actually upgraded your extension to pro mode, you can actually right-click on a folder. Let's see if I can do that. Yeah, if I right-click on this tags folder, for example, you see this menu, it says run Karate test. It will actually run all the Karate tests in that folder. Okay, it's using Maven. Let me just switch back to bundled mode for the rest of this demo. Yeah, that's another nice thing about the upgrade, which is, this is just one click away. Yeah, let's rerun. Yeah, this folder. So yes, the short summary of what I'm saying is that you can right-click and run all tests in that folder, which is obviously very handy when you really have a lot of tests and you're really a pro power user of Karate. Now I want to show you what I mean by the run options. And if you look at this test, it has two scenarios. This feature has two scenarios tagged as foo. And if I run this by default, it's going to run all the scenarios, right? It actually ran first, second, and third. So how can I actually say I only want to run the scenarios tagged with foo? Easy. That's where the run options comes in. It's basically the same command line arguments that you pass to Karate. If you say, for example, -t stands for tags. So we've just set the run options, and then now any operation you do in Karate would use those run options, and you can see it's only run the second and third, the only ones with foo in it. It gets even more interesting if you want to run tests on multiple threads, and I say I want to use 5 threads. Let's see that work. If I go to, let me attempt running all Karate tests in a folder, but now with some run options. Yeah, as expected, you can actually make out the Karate is actually using a thread pool now and ran 3 scenarios, all 3 on different threads. We can confirm from the report that Karate actually used 5 threads. If we open the report and go to the timeline, we should be seeing, yeah, the 3 threads that were used, and we can confirm with visually that the tests actually ran in parallel. So a reminder, one of the key differentiators of Karate, and one of the reasons a lot of enterprises choose Karate is because we can run tests in parallel. All right, so that's the run mode. Let me just reset that before I do anything else. And I've already explained the context menu. You can right click. We can even start mocks, and I'm going to get into that demo in a minute. And before that, let me show you Postman Import. That's one of the key things in this release of the Visual Studio Code extension. And this has really come out of a lot of feedback from enterprises. Teams that have reached the limits of their Postman test suites. They really want to do things like integrate with databases, parallel execution, definitely. Complex async scenarios where they want to talk to Kafka and messages. But the most important reason why teams switch away to Karate is because they really want to do parameterized tests, data-driven tests, loop over data. Karate is really, really good at data. That's the topic for another session actually. But I really want to show you the example of how we do Postman conversions. What this means is that if you are a team that has a lot of Postman collections lying around, or your teams are using Postman to just do exploratory testing of APIs, that's great. Postman is actually excellent for that. You can actually take those collections, put it into Karate, and you can convert them to Karate tests. And the best part about this conversion that we really worked hard on to achieve is if you have tests in Postman, and you should always have tests whenever you're doing API testing, and in Postman, the tests are written in JavaScript. What I've highlighted here, it's this interesting JavaScript syntax that's derived from a library called Chai, if I remember right, CHAI. And we actually support this syntax. I've already downloaded this collection. I think all of you know from Postman, there's an easy way to export your entire data from Postman as a collection. So I've already got a folder where this collection is there. And here's the very elegant user interface that we came up with. And we are taking all the advantages of Visual Studio Code being local on your machine. It's not like a SaaS where you risk having all your sensitive data as part of your tests going to somebody else's cloud. And this was something a lot of our enterprise customers strongly requested, that they really wanted to do their Postman collection conversions locally without sending any data outside their firewalls. And what I've done, this folder, I've got a Postman collection which I actually downloaded from that example that I was showing you. I just drag and I didn't drag that properly. Yeah, here goes again. Drag it. There we go. Yeah. Drag it and opened it in Visual Studio Code. And here's the thing, look for this there's this icon on the top right. We've added this option, Karate option, in the context menu of Visual Studio Code. And if I click that, it actually processes that file, kind of analyzes it, automatically detects that it is a Postman file. And in one extra click, you can actually convert that to a real Karate test, including the assertions. And if you look at the assertions side by side, right, status code is 200, which is actually this one line. Status checks in Karate is actually just 2 words, much more concise. And of course, I think most of you know that the match syntax of Karate is actually extremely sophisticated, takes care of all kinds of edge cases, and is crisp enough for someone who, you don't need to know JavaScript, you just need a high-level understanding of how JSON looks like, which is pretty simple. And then if you know how to use the match keyword of Karate, you're just up and running with assertions. And chaining data from the previous response into the next request. See how easy it is in Karate. You just define a variable and easily plug that variable into the next path. In this example, you can certainly put it in the body. Extremely easy, a lot of options. And I can certainly run this test and it would work. So yeah, you just saw how in 2 clicks actually and a drag, you were able to import a Postman collection. And let me now show you, I'll spend 2 minutes on mocks and then the last 5 minutes on how mocks and the OpenAPI support works, right? So to summarize, and make sure I've just completed all the bullet points in our release, I'm going to demonstrate OpenAPI import. So yes, just like Postman collections, you can import OpenAPI or Swagger and convert those to Karate tests, but it gets better. You can actually convert them to Karate mocks, and I'm going to demonstrate that. It's a little advanced topic of Karate, but there's a lot of enterprise teams that are doing a lot of work with OpenAPI, want to automatically generate mocks, but want to generate smart mocks, and mocks that I can actually behave almost like a real API server and be customizable with business logic and so on. So Karate gives you a way to do that. It's all explained in the documentation. In fact, there is, in the latest version of Karate 1.3.0, a complete extension to our mock capability. So I leave you to read that as as a reference link, which you can easily find from the Karate documentation. And before I end this session on going deep into OpenAPI and mocks, I just want to mention, I won't do a demo for the interest of time. You can import curl and HAR import. And a reminder that whenever you go to a browser, for example, in Chrome, you can always look at the network tab. Let's say refresh the screen. Yeah, it's like going to Postman, and then you can right click and copy as curl, copy as HAR. Okay, and if I copy as HAR, here's the interesting thing: you can actually double click anywhere into Visual Studio Code, paste this entire humongous HAR section, and it will convert to a HAR file, to a Karate test, at the end of this process. So something for you to look out for. And I have this example where we have a shorter HAR file. So it's going to do that faster. Convert to Karate script would give you all the information of that HAR file as a Karate script. All right, so let's take a look at the OpenAPI import support. I am going to use the pet store as an example because everyone relates to this. It's been around for a long time. Same process. Once you've opened a file, you get this option on the right. Click that. You can convert this pet store OpenAPI sample to a Karate script. Brings in all the URLs, and yeah, it actually sticks the URL in the background to make it easier and much more structured, and reuse patterns and all being involved. But here's something interesting. Before I go deep into mocks and the mock options in OpenAPI, I just want to give you a quick primer on how mock development actually works within the Karate extension. And let me just create a new file here called mock.js. And I'm just going to type one line, which is response.body is equal to hello world. For those of you who have been using Karate for a while, this is a little different. This is the new JavaScript way of writing mocks that we have introduced in 1.3.0. It's a lot simpler. There's some trade-offs. It's going to be much easier for you to do complex logic. I'll give you a teaser of that. And if I right-click this mock and say run as Karate mock, it would start a mock server on port 8090, which is configurable. 8090 is the default. And this simply means that if you go to HTTP localhost, 8090, you would actually see hello world. And the brilliant thing about this hello world, this mock, is that you can actually edit it on the fly. I just made a change, saved it, no restarting of anything. It hot reloads. If I load that, it would actually take effect. And let me show you an example of writing a test to hit that mock. So let's put Karate through all its spaces. I'm going to write a test. In fact, just for one of the nice things about Visual Studio Code, any kind of IDE editor experience is you can actually lay out things in a wonderful way. I have the test on the left, the mock on the right, and now I'm actually going to do this interesting, orchestration between both. And I'll tell you what I mean. I'm just going to write the world's simplest API test URL 8090 and the method get. And if I run this test, you see hello change come back. Okay. And to just give you a simple example, and this is a very, very vast topic. there is a concept of a session that we have. So if I say session dot items is equal to, this is okay. We can actually push. I will explain what I'm doing in a moment. Request dot body. Anytime the mock handles an incoming request, there is a object called request which is available. You can of course look at the headers and anything you want. The body is what you typically are interested in. What we're doing is we are pushing we're pushing the request that just came in into a session, storing it. And what I'm demonstrating at a very high level is how you can handle state in a Karate mock, and how the JavaScript option makes it a little more easier for you to sculpt these mocks that actually behave in the ways that you want. And if I jump all the way to one of the things we are doing for the future, one of the things this mock is going to drive for us in the future is API documentation. And you're already getting a sense of how this happens, right? You are having a test on the left, you're making requests, you're handling the requests that you yourself have created. You're kind of bouncing between your own test and your own mock, both of which you fully control. And if you control these two things in the right way and run your test, you will actually get proper API documentation. You'll get a very clear expression of what APIs are available, what data you send to the APIs, how the APIs behaved. And as I'm going to show you, you can actually add some logic. So if you say that your API is going to behave differently depending on state, I'm going to give you an example of that. And I say the response dot body is equal to session dot items. The first line being like, this is a very common JavaScript pattern. It just means that the first time you start and there is no session, we initialize the session to an empty array. But after that, we're just adding with the push command to that session.items array. So the effect of this is that anytime we make a post, in fact, let me make a post so that there's going to be a request body, request hello world, again, not being very creative. And yeah, that's all we need to do. So every time I run this test, that request will be in the request body. It's going to get added to the session item. So every time we run this test, we're going to get back anything that's in the session items in the response body. It's just going to keep piling up, and you'll just see what I mean in a minute. I'm running this test. I got one hello world back. I rerun this test. I got 2 hello worlds back. I ran it again and I got 3 hello worlds back. You see what's going on here, right? It's almost like a database. It's in memory, of course. But if you understand this concept and you understand the API of Karate, and I've told you where to look for it in the documentation, you can build some super complex mocks that handle all the business rules that you care about. And you can even give this mock to potential users of your API. If you want to test your API in some kind of an API playground. And with that, let me come to and by the way, of course, you can actually kill the mock that you started from our Karate menu. And with that, let me complete the session by talking a little bit about OpenAPI. So when I imported the OpenAPI for the pet store example, I got 2 more options, which is to generate a mock file. And this is a very interesting file. It basically extracts all the useful API schema information out of that spec. If I save this, I can save this as the name that we recommend is spec.js. Side by side with that, you can generate this mock file, which is very interesting. Boilerplate. It's almost like a mini framework. And the effect of all of this is that you can customize the mock server that has been automatically generated from the pet store, from the OpenAPI specification, you can actually overlay your custom rules onto it. For example, if you want a custom validation that when you create a pet in the pet store, the name should be 4 characters long, you can actually add that validation and then inject that into your mock server. And the way this is all designed is that in case your OpenAPI specification changes, your custom rules are decoupled, they are in a different file, and that's one of the interesting design decisions we made. In the interest of time, I will probably not show you that the detailed demo, but it depends on in case there are questions. So let me check on that. But if you want to see a real example of what I mean by importing the OpenAPI information and then running a test, getting a report, because your mock is now being scripted to handle different business scenarios. To give you an example, and there's also a video linked in the marketplace if you're interested in a deep dive into a particular example, taking a large real life OpenAPI specification, or a Swagger example, and converting that almost to API documentation that makes sense, because it's showing how a particular scenario of sending a request that failed a particular validation, and how you can actually have the mock simulate that scenario and get a report that reflects that. And the reason we do all of this is that when you give that report to a consumer or potential consumer of your API, that team or that person would have all the information they need to make a call to your API. But even better, or the most key thing that we are solving for with Karate's approach and the design is that we are very, very focused on a sequence of APIs. Okay, when you have only one API call, you typically don't end up doing things very useful. What I'm trying to say is that when you have to perform some key meaningful business outcome for your end user, you would go through a sequence of APIs. It's like create an account, open shopping cart, and then add items to shopping cart, close shopping cart. All these APIs actually have to happen in the background when you're doing a shopping cart flow. And unless you test that entire flow in the same sequence, and you can't start in the middle because you need some setup data and so on, you have to go through that whole flow, and only then can you really be confident that your system is being tested. But when you are thinking of API documentation, if you just go and give your end consumer, this is how you call this API A, this is how you call this API B, there's still a lot of information people want, and people really need to be able to make meaningful API calls. And this is the analysis we have done. This is the reason why people take time to understand API documentation, because most API documentation is actually structured around one get, one post, one patch, one delete at a time. But to show you what I mean, let me run another example and also show you a slightly different demo. And this is a sneak preview of what's coming in the future versions of Karate. This example is actually, some of you in the testing space would know about the RESTful Booker example. It's actually a very interesting flow of creating an authentication token, defining a payload which represents a hotel booking, actually, creating a booking, finding a booking by name. There's a whole business flow. So I'm actually going to run this. It's hitting a live server on the internet. I really love the color log output that I was talking about. And if I open this in a browser, you can actually see, and if you comment your test, the right way, you will actually be able to make out all the API calls you made, what were the API calls doing. So an end user, business analyst, or a product owner can actually come and make sense of what this test was doing. And finally, the last part of this demo, I think I've completed the OpenAPI and the mocking piece, and given you kind of a whirlwind introduction to the mocks that Karate allows you to edit. And of course, you have this right-click option to run a mock. I also demonstrated how you could actually start a mock, edit the mock, and then rerun your test without having to stop and restart too many things. And this API report, this is what I'm now about to show you, is not part of the formal release. This is coming in the next version. But I'm showing you this because I know a lot of people will be super interested in what you're about to see. But we are working on making a more user-friendly report of all the APIs that actually happened when you ran a test. So the test is on the left. I told you about this hotel booking use case. So we made a bunch of API requests, and every single API request has been neatly collected into this report on the right. And if I actually, I can actually explode each request and see the payloads that were sent. And by default, we actually show you the payloads in a very user-friendly way. So you see this post and the response came back as a 200. You can, of course, switch between the JSON and the much more user-friendly representation that we have. We're kind of very excited about this way in which we are showing results. And if you have an array, we actually show it to you in a very neat form, and this actually scrolls to the right if you have a lot of data, in case you're wondering about that. So this is coming. We are working currently on refining this UI on the right. Of course, we are in kind of development mode here. And if you have any questions or suggestions around what we could do better here, we are always interested in hearing from you and what you think. So with that, I have reached the end of what I really wanted to cover in terms of the Visual Studio Code features. There's of course a whole bunch of things, and I just gave you a sneak peek of API documentation. There's lots more coming around that space. But to summarize, we today demonstrated debug, code folding, JSON formatting, the run mode, the run options, being able to right-click in a context menu and run all tests, the imports from Postman, OpenAPI / Swagger, curl, and HAR. So with that, I think if there are questions, I'll be happy to take them, or we could probably end a few minutes early.